Hello guys, so this is Miss Watkins, and I wanted to give you guys a quick study session over your very first test over Reconstruction. So like I said in class, normally I do these after school. We have pizza, we'll go over all the questions on the test in like actually in my classroom so that you can ask questions, but just with all the different classes that I'm teaching, I just can't do that with everybody. So I'm going to try to just do these online for this trimester. If I have you next trimester though, I'm going to go back to doing the after school study session. So we'll go back to that. I'm teaching 3 U.S. History Bs next trimester. So I think I'll actually get a whole lot of you in those classes. So hopefully everything will go back to it then. But in the meantime, we'll have to make this work. So this is my Chinese classroom. So I don't just have like teacher Sarah like at my house. This is actually what I use whenever I'm teaching. You can see like I've got all my like little Chinese American prop stuff. I thought I would just take a couple minutes. We'll go over the test, go over any questions, and then you can watch this however many times that you want until you can finally get down all the questions. Okay, so remember that the way that the test is set up, it is 30 multiple choice, 10 fill in the blanks, and then 1 open response. Okay, gosh, my hair is doing some crazy stuff. So we'll pick up from there. We talked about the open response in class. It's about how did African Americans gain and maintain their rights? How successful were they in doing that? And so you'll want to mention the 3 rights that they get: 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. Know what those 3 are: abolishing slavery, citizenship, and then suffrage. And then the loopholes for each one of those. And the loophole to the 13th Amendment was sharecropping. It's a way to keep you perpetually indebted to the landowner. The way around the Supreme Court case, or the way around the citizenship, was the Supreme Court cases: Slaughterhouse and U.S. versus Cruikshank. And then the loopholes around the 15th Amendment, where the grandfather clause, literacy test, poll tax, all of those were ways that they could legally get around suffrage. So we already talked about that in class. You should already know that. So let's talk about the other questions that are on the test. So first off, it asks the 10% plan. So the 10% plan was Lincoln's plan. And remember, the whole idea behind it was that it's supposed to be lenient. Let's try to get people back into the Union, and let's try to do it as quickly as possible. So Lincoln said, I only want 10% of the state's voters to have to take the oath. So that means that 90% of the rest of that state didn't have to want to become back part of the United States. They'd be like, I hate the United States, and they still were allowed to come back. It's a very lenient plan. So 10% plan, only 10% of the state's voters had to take that loyalty oath, and then you could come back into the Union. Okay. Now we have radical Republicans. Remember, they are members of Congress, and so they do not like the 10% plan. They actually want to try to veto it down, and they come up with their own, the Wade Davis bill. But the reason why they don't like the 10% plan is that they felt like the South should have harsher readmittance terms, that they should have to pay penalties, they should have to go to jail. Like, let's make it harsher for them. And they're also very pro-African American, and they feel like they need more rights, and people in the South aren't going to treat them right. So they are going to definitely be against the 10% plan because they feel like it should be harsher. Hey, now, if you remember President Johnson, who takes over the presidency after Abraham Lincoln dies, God rest his soul, my favorite president. Then when he takes over, we know that a lot of those radical Republicans do not like Andrew Johnson. And so they're going to try to find a way to get him impeached. And that happens when he fires the Secretary of War. Hopefully you're already thinking it, Edwin Stanton. So now, one of the choices on this says that what got President Johnson impeached was the passage of the Tenure of Office Act. And that's not true. Just because it got passed doesn't mean that that would cause him to get impeached. It's because he broke that act when he fired Edwin Stanton. Remember, Tenure of Office Act says that you're not allowed to fire somebody unless you get the Senate approval. And they did that on purpose because they knew Johnson wanted to fire this guy. So what got him impeached by the House of Representatives, remember the Senate didn't, so that's why he didn't get impeached altogether, was because he fires Edwin Stanton. All right, now, I already mentioned sharecropping, about how that kept people perpetually indebted to the landowner. There were also some other systems. So there's sharecropping, share tenancy, and then tenant farming. So in sharecropping, you didn't get to choose your crop, but you did get supplies from the landowner and you had to pay a share. Sharecropping, there has to be a share. Share tenancy is the same thing. You got to pay a share. You do get supplies, but what ends up happening with that is that you get to choose your crop. Okay, so with share tenancy, you have more choice over your crops and supplies. You have more control than what happened in sharecropping. And remember that the best one is tenant farming, because in tenant farming, you didn't have to pay a share. You paid a fee up front, but African Americans can't do that because they don't have any money. They've been slaves, and so they don't have any money. Okay. Now, during Reconstruction, we have some bad groups rise up. We know the Redeemers and then the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. Now, we did try to create some laws, like the Enforcement Acts, that said it is illegal to force or coerce anyone to vote or not to vote. That was passed in 1870 and in 1871, but it's not going to be very effective. But so they still try to do that. So the KKK is using violence to prevent freed people from voting. There's actually 2 questions that are about that. Now, something that's successful about Reconstruction, we talked a lot about the bad stuff. Something that's good is that they did get tax-supported schools. So that's something that everyone is allowed to have now. Everyone gets the privilege of that. You don't have to pay to learn how to read and write. Now, the Compromise of 1877 happens when we have the election of 1876, and we don't know who the winner is. It could be Rutherford B. Hayes, it could be Sam Tilden. We're not really sure because one won the popular vote, one won the electoral vote, college vote. So who should be president? So they come up with this compromise. They say, okay, the North needs something and the South needs something. That's how you compromise. Everybody gets something. So the North is going to get the president. We're going to allow you to get Rutherford B. Hayes, the guy that you wanted. But the South gets an end to military reconstruction. So what did Republicans gain from the compromise? Remember, Republicans are North, so they're going to get Rutherford B. Hayes as president. Okay. Now, how did Hayes' election effectively end Reconstruction? Well, because the South got the end of military reconstruction. So 2 questions on that. Make sure that you know the difference between the 2. Right now, the Republican Party, even though they're primarily in the North, they start getting really popular in the South and they get a lot of support. It's because African Americans who can now vote and have never been able to vote before, now they're going to vote Republican because Abe Lincoln's Republican and he's amazing. And he does the Emancipation Proclamation. So that's why everyone wants to vote. All African Americans want to vote Republican because Abraham Lincoln was Republican. So that makes them really strong in the South. Now, by the end of the 1860s, military reconstruction, the support for that starts to fade. Even in the North, the people who came up with it, it's even starting to fade because it's very expensive. The cost of the military operations and military reconstruction worries a lot of people. You have to pay for all of those soldiers' food, for their clothes, for their board, the Union generals. It's just a lot of money. And we just don't have that much money. So eventually it's going to have to die out anyway. Now, if you remember, we talked about the Supreme Court decisions and how they limited the scope of the 14th Amendment. So that is a multiple choice question. It is also on your essay. Most missed question on the test is that one right there. That's one of the most missed questions. And people always forget it on the essay. So the Supreme Court decisions, remember that's Slaughterhouse and U.S. versus Cruikshank, they restricted the scope of the 14th Amendment. Because it was even restricting the scope for white people. So of course they're not going to use that towards black people either. Now, what action did Congress take to support Southern African Americans? If you'll remember, the Radical Republicans, they were very pro-African American. So they want to help them. And Radical Republicans are the guys that are in Congress. They're the congressmen. They just call themselves the Radical Republicans. So what they do is they are for the Freedmen's Bureau because that helps out former slaves, gets them a little bit of money, like helps take care of them. If you remember, Johnson tried to veto it and they end up overturning his veto. So that's how they're going to try to help African Americans, is by doing that. Now, next question talks about with farmers. There's one thing that threatens to destroy all of their crops, all of their work, and it's this little tiny bug called the boll weevil. And it eats all the cotton and it causes all of it to rot. And it's a big problem because all they have grown is cotton, and the boll weevil only eats cotton. And so it's caused all of their crops to be gone. They've lost all this money. They almost go under because of this. Next question asks about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and how to accurately describe them. So Black Southerners are getting more rights, but they are struggling to maintain them because of all those loopholes. So we got these good things. Yay, we're getting these amendments passed. But it's bad because the Redeemers find ways around every single one of them. Now then the question asks, how did they lose their rights then from the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments? Well, they lose it through state legislation, like those poll taxes, the literacy test, the grandfather clauses. They also lose it because of segregation and violence from the KKK. So all those things are working against them and their freedom. Okay, the next question on the test actually has a graph. So you're going to look at the graph, and it's called Railroad Growth in the South from 1860 to 1900. And I'm, just in case you didn't know, I'm looking like straight at the test. I have my laptop up here, and so I'm just reading off questions on the test. Okay, so it says, using this chart, in what year did railroad travel exceed 18,000 miles? Okay, so you just need to read the chart, see where it jumps up the most, and then pick that year. It's really easy when you look at the choices. Okay, now the first great boom in the West was spurred by what would be the reason why we're going to get all these people moving out west? I mean, there's lots of things that are out there. We've got the Homestead Act. We've got gold. There's lots of land. There's opportunities. There's jobs. I mean, we're finding lots of stuff out there. But what causes the boom is the railroad. Because now people can go out there so fast. That's what causes a boom. Yeah, there had been gold, but it couldn't really boom because it took you forever to get out of there. But with the railroad, it doesn't take as long. And so that helps with all these other things. They're going to precipitate the population moving. Okay, now the open range system that we use, our cowboys end up using, was created by the Mexican vaqueros. So they use this big open range system where you just let your cows graze, and then when it's time to take them to slaughter them, which is so sad, but we like hamburger and steak and all that good stuff. So we got to take those cows and we got to go kill them. So they've got to take them up to the railroad and then out east. So, or I guess for you guys, this would be east. So we got to take them out east so that when we get to Chicago, we can take them to slaughterhouses and they make money off of that. So the Mexican vaqueros were the ones that did that long drive. Now, if you moved out west and you wanted to build a home, you had to build it out of sod. You couldn't build it out of wood or bricks. I mean, bricks are just way expensive. But you can't use lumber because there's not a whole lot of trees that are out west. And if they did have any trees that had lumber, it would cost you $1 million or something like that. It would cost a lot of money. So you have to have sod, which is basically dirt and grass that you're building your house out of. But people did it. Hey, now that we're talking about the West, we're also going to have to talk about Native Americans and about the situation that happens with them. What best describes their situation at the end of the Indian Wars? This is around 1890 when all the wars are over. What causes this is that most Native Americans are forced to live on reservations by this point. None of them are free. None of them can practice their own religion, their own culture, their own language. They're all on reservations. They're all assimilated. It's a really sad story. Now, what was an effect of the Transcontinental Railroad? We've already talked about it. It gets people out there so much faster. It causes the population of the West to increase because people can get out there. You don't have to worry about dying on the Oregon Trail. It's going to be so much faster. You're going to be on this train. It's going to be a much better experience. So it makes the population of the West boom. Now, railroads also benefit ranchers because, like we said earlier, it allows for cowboys to take their to take the meat and to transport it back east. We've got that mention of the refrigerated railroad card, and it helps them to get all that meat back east, where they can sell it in Chicago and New York, all those things. So the railroad helps them to do that a lot faster because if you were having to do it on horse and buggy, it'd take you way too long. The meat would spoil by that point. So the railroad is going to help out cowboys by a whole lot. And if you remember when we talked about at the beginning with Native Americans, why do we have such a clash with them? Well, it's because they view nature as sacred and we view it as a resource. Think about the buffalo. We just want their hide. We'll leave the rest of the buffalo. We don't even care. But Native Americans use every part of the buffalo because they believe the buffalo is sacred and that it had a spirit and that we should honor that. So already from the main beginning, just who we are is different. And so that's why there's going to be that clash, that conflict between Native Americans and white people. Now, Native Americans were threatened by diseases that we introduced. If you remember, like, it could just be even the flu, alcoholism. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we bring to them that they've never experienced before. And so their bodies just can't handle that. And if already we weren't fighting with them enough or destroying all the buffalo, now these diseases are killing a lot of them. Okay, so most Native Americans get assimilated. And if you remember, assimilated means I'm going to make you look like me, talk like me, act like me, smell like me, eat food like me. Everything is going to be white. We want you to look exactly white. And maybe if we like wish hard enough, you'll like magically turn into white. Is what they're trying to do, is trying to get these people to give up everything because they don't like change. They don't like people that are different. And so it's just a sad situation what they end up doing to Native Americans. So assimilation is not something that Native Americans wanted. Of course, it would not be something to give up all their way of life. So assimilation is not a goal of any Native American. So on this choice, do not pick a Native American. They would not have been pro-assimilation. Instead, it was in the Dawes General Allotment Act. That new law was passed and it said that they were going to assimilate them. They're going to give them 160 acres of land, but it's going to be way far away from anyone that is related to them that's in their tribe. And we're purposely trying to assimilate them. Now, bouncing back to Lincoln, when Lincoln had Congress when he was still alive. What was something that they got along with? Now, remember, Congress didn't like his 10% plan. But there is something that they both like, and that was the Freedmen's Bureau. They both thought that the Freedmen's Bureau was a good idea, and so Lincoln actually steals that out of the Wade-Davis bill that they proposed. They had that 51%. He's going to be the one to take that and actually uses the Freedmen's Bureau until Johnson comes into the picture and he wants to get rid of it, and it does eventually die out in 1872. Now, this is an easy question. Who becomes the president after Lincoln's assassination? It's always the vice president takes over, and that was Andrew Johnson. Then there's a quote. It's actually a quote from the 14th Amendment. So it tells you like the very first section. And the question says, this passage from the 14th Amendment, and you're just going to pick something that talks about citizenship rights, because we already know 14th Amendment, citizenship rights. But if you can't remember, there is this excerpt, and you can just read through it, and it basically tells you that it grants full citizenship to all people born in the United States. Okay? And then what basically would describe the agriculture in the South after the Civil War? It's all cotton. King cotton. Everyone's growing cotton, and remember we already said that's a bad deal when the boll weevil comes to town because it wipes out everything. So people are going to have to change up and diversify their crops because they lose everything with this boll weevil. It's weird to think like this tiny little bug can like affect so many people. Okay, now these people are Southern white Democrats. Remember I told you if it's Southern white Democrat, these are the redeemers. Remember they promote the lost cause. They're trying to get the South to rise back to how it was before. Those are redeemers. Now this is the place where Crazy Horse defeated General George Armstrong Custer. Remember, defeated 246. On here, I just rounded up to 250. But so kills all of those men. That was the Battle of Little Bighorn. And remember, we did that on our virtual reality things. So you got to actually see what that battlefield looked like. Thaddeus Stephen and Charles Sumner, what group did they belong to? They were radical Republicans. I remember they're the ones that wanted to punish the South, want to help African Americans. They are radical Republicans. Okay, now there's a book that was written in 1881 called A Century of Dishonor. There was a woman who wrote it. She always takes her pictures like this or like this. And her name is Helen Hunt Jackson. Okay, remember those three names. Helen Hunt Jackson. And it talked about the plight of Native Americans, help people to see like how bad we were treating them. Now, according to this, it said the South would be divided into 5 military districts. That is military Reconstruction. You can also put radical Reconstruction. So it's called both things because the radical Republicans were the ones that came up with it. Who are Northerners that pack up all their belongings, move to the South in order to make a profit? They're carpetbaggers. So think in your head, if they're moving, they're putting their stuff in that carpet bag. It's like their suitcase that's so hideous. They're so, so ugly. But so those are carpetbaggers. We're almost done. These are Southern whites who support the Republican Party. So don't get confused. They're not Southern white Democrats. Those are redeemers. These are Southern white Republicans. So these are guys that are in the South that should have been Democrats, but they decided to switch parties to the Republican Party. They're scalawags. Now remember, it doesn't have a Y in it. It has an A, scalawags. So they switched the Republican Party, gets them in a lot of trouble. I've already mentioned this one. This was Congress's plan that required 51% of a state's voters to take the loyalty oath, the Wade Davis bill. Remember, radical Republicans came up with it. Lincoln said no. Remember, they wanted 51% too because it was over the majority. But he ends up vetoing it, doesn't take it. Wade Davis bill. Okay, we only got two more and then we're finished. So this was signed in 1868. It was between the U.S. government and the Sioux Indians. It promised them the Black Hills of the Dakotas. That was the Treaty of Fort Laramie. Laramie. So don't forget that. The Treaty of Fort Laramie is where we said, oh yeah, Native Americans, we'll give you the Black Hills. You guys can have that. We will never go over there. You just got to promise you'll never leave and you'll only stay there. Let us have this land, you have that land. And we end up finding gold in the Black Hills and we go against our word. So again, all the conflicts that we have with Native Americans, it's always due to us breaking our word. Think back to like Sand Creek Massacre and those things. All right, the last question on the test. It is, what war occurred in Texas from 1883 to 1884 between ranchers and cowboys after the invention of barbed wire by Joseph Glidden? It is the Fence Cutters War. Make sure you write that. I don't accept anything else. Fence Cutters War. It's where they were going around cutting those fences. The ranchers get really mad at the cowboys for doing that. But the cowboys are like, I can't take all these hundreds of cows and go 160 acres around. So they just destroy their property. And it ends up leading to the end of the cowboys. All right, so that is all the questions that are on your test. Since you watched to the end of this video, I'm going to actually tell you what the bonus question is. So I always put a bonus question on every one of the tests. So the bonus question for this one says, what was the last major conflict between Native Americans? And it was over the ghost dance. And the answer to that is the Battle of Wounded Knee. If you remember, I told you the story about Josh Watkins dancing with that floozy at prom and ends up wounded his knee because he was dancing. So if you can remember that, the ghost dance was the Battle of Wounded Knee that happens in 1890. So for the bonus question, just remember Wounded Knee. And then I'll get you a bonus question answer, okay? All right, so I hope that you feel good about the test. I'll see you guys on Monday. Make sure that you study, and good luck.